Right, hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I thought we would do something potentially fun, potentially really quite exposing. For myself, I am going to reread my university dissertation, my undergraduate dissertation, for the first time since I submitted it in 2008. So it is nearly 20 years since I wrote this, which if you really want to do some maths, yes, you can work out how old I am. I'm 37. So I wrote this. I was at the University of Leicester. Here it is, the original printed document with comments and my grades and all of the details. I have blacked out the name of the tutor, but this is the original one, and I found it recently and I thought, wouldn't it be funny? Potentially, wouldn't it be funny to read through my old dissertation and find out A, if it was any good, and B, if I've improved at all since then. Obviously it's very subjective because I'm reading my own work, but also we can be our own harshest critics. So I just thought it might be a bit of a fun video to reread it. And this is my dissertation for my undergraduate degree. Yeah, I got a BA in English from the University of Leicester. And if you are unfamiliar with the British education system, basically when you do your degree, your undergraduate degree, your dissertation is kind of like your final essay. It's the big project that you work on. Usually takes several months to work on it, and then you submit it. And it's kind of, I'm not sure exactly how much of my kind of like final score, you know, in terms of percentages, because usually your dissertation might be like 50% of your final grade or whatever. I did graduate with a 2-1, so we get a first, which is the best you can get, 2-1, 2-2 and a third. Those are the different levels of degree. So I got a 2-1, which was like the second best. I was really happy with that. I knew I wasn't going to get a first. I can't remember what my overall grade was, so I think basically 70 and above was a first. That's the same for essays as it is for the overall degree. 60 to 70 was a 2-1. 50 to 60 was a 2-2, is that right? And then 40 to 50 is a third. And then I think anything under 40% was a fail, and you were allowed to retake either the year or you were allowed to retake certain exams, but the maximum you could ever get was 40%, so you'd only ever get a pass in that retake. That's how I believe it worked when I was at university, but like I say, we're going back nearly 20 years. I don't know if the university system has changed much since then. I chose to do my dissertation because I was doing English. I loved reading even when I was at university. I've loved reading since I was a child, and books that I absolutely loved were the Philippa Gregory Tudor series and also pretty much all of Elizabeth Chadwick's books. I loved them, and I think because I was a young teenager, I wasn't, I suppose I was an old teenager going into my early 20s. I hadn't met my husband yet. I was desperate for that romance. I was desperate for that knight in shining armour moment, and my own kind of love story. And I loved history, and I loved books that were set in historical time periods. So I knew that I wanted to kind of write about books I really loved, but I also was really interested in the role of like how books about historical women could make modern people rethink history. It's quite interesting really that my dissertation is about women being seen throughout history, and then I went on to become a female historian. So if you don't know, I have 2 books that are traditionally published. They are non-fiction books, and they are about women's history within the sphere of the English country house. I'll put the pictures of them up on screen now. It's called my first book is called Lady of the House, and it's about women who married and lived in country houses and kind of the world that they lived in and the things that they got up to while they were married. And then my second book is about unmarried women, and it's about women who chose not to marry and how they had the financial freedom to do so and what they did instead and why they chose not to marry. I am currently working on my third book, which is about widows, but that is taking an awful lot of research for various different reasons. So it's interesting that I went on to write about women's history and to research women's history after I'd written this dissertation nearly 20 years ago. Let's get into this. So this is the front page. It's the assessment page, and on it has, I'm hoping you can see this, on it has things like my candidate number and the date, and then the essay title. So the title of the essay was The Role of the Female Narrator in Reinterpreting History Through Philippa Gregory's Novels. And this is also so funny, I've just realised this is also so funny because I met Philippa Gregory recently as well, and I got to say to her what a huge impact she as a writer had on my reading, my education, my writing. And I said to her, I wrote my undergraduate dissertation about your books. Now, Philippa Gregory is never going to see this video that I'm putting together, but if by some huge, very, very slim chance somebody close to her happens to see this, I would love her to know that this is the dissertation I was talking about. And I've got a photograph, and I'll put the photograph on again, of me meeting her. They say don't meet your heroes, and I only got to talk to her very briefly for literally about 30 seconds to a minute. She was lovely, and she was genuinely interested. It was really hard. She had like 300 people to meet, and I was the first person that she met, and so she was very kind of, she'd just come off stage from doing a talk, and I know that she couldn't really take in what I was saying, but I hope that what I said stayed with her, because I just really wanted her to know the impact that she'd had on me. And I think I'm a writer now, and I think if somebody reads my books and it inspires them to do something similar with their own lives and has an impact on their life, what a wonderful thing to be able to say that your words, your writing, which is such a personal thing to do, to write, has had that impact on somebody else. Anyway, so yeah, that's just a lovely kind of full circle moment. So another reason why I wanted to reassess this, really. My overall mark for this was 67. So you see, I was 3 marks off getting a first for my dissertation. And I actually really would have liked to have got a first for this. I knew I wouldn't get a first for my overall degree. I'm not that clever, but I would have really loved a first for my dissertation. Anyway, I got a 67, so that was a 2-1, solid 2-1. But you can see here that I got quite a lot of firsts for different areas. Didn't get anything lower than a 2-1, which is great. So then we've got comments to students on the bottom here. I don't think I'm going to read that yet. I think I'm going to leave that comment and let's go in and read the whole thing. Now, there is one thing I do remember about this essay, is that I worked very closely with my tutor, and she was lovely and we got on really well. Everything was fine. We had a really lovely experience. And then when I got this back, I got my score and I was reading through, and I got up here at the top, could you not think of a better title? That could you not think of a better title, has stuck with me throughout my entire life. I thought about that quite a lot, even after I forgot where this even was. And it's kind of followed me, because I'm genuinely terrible at titles. I don't have a title for my Lighthouse novel. I didn't write the title for my 2 published books. The publisher works, it's one of the things with traditional publishing, the publisher will kind of decide on the title with you. I didn't know that there was anything wrong with my title until I got that mark. Let's get into reading. I don't particularly want to, I'm not going to read it out to you, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit here and read it. And if there's anything that's good or bad, I'm going to kind of say what I think. Kind of a little bit of a reaction video as I read it. Okay, so I'm spotting some mistakes already. I've got like a word in that shouldn't be in there. Historians look at how the female role has evolved and how throughout history women have endangered themselves to challenge the masculine hierarchy. I'm guessing that should be women have endangered themselves to challenge the masculine hierarchy. You become blind though, don't you, when you're writing something and you've edited it and you've edited it and you've read it over and you've read it over, and you just miss mistakes like that. That's why when it does come to writing and you are writing either traditionally published or you're self-publishing, like, it's really great to have an editor, because they pick up on stuff like that, because you do genuinely become blind to things. Pretty impressed so far. What historical novelist Philippa Gregory explores in her novels is the resistance of women in the Tudor and Elizabethan period to the patriarchal roles ascribed to them. Basing her novels around key events and persons, for example, Henry VIII and his wives, Elizabeth I and Mary I, Gregory uses a female narrator, sometimes fictional, in order to reinterpret the role of the female figure in this period. The use of this form of narratives allows us to speculate about what really happened to the women of the period, while still being enticed with the lure of infamous historical characters. That's not bad, if I say so myself. I am sure that there are also going to be things that I cringe about in this, though. Okay, so here I've said, Gregory's novels demonstrate how female historical figures are now beginning to achieve recognition in literature. The person who's reviewed this has said this has actually been going on for quite some time. Like, okay, if it's been going on for quite some time, maybe what they're trying to say there is that I haven't really been very good at saying, like looking into the history of, or the reinterpretation of female characters. I'm just like, it's now being seen, and actually I didn't potentially know exactly what feminist literature, the whole of feminist literature and the development of it. Obviously at a master's or a PhD level, you would look into the depth of female literature or literature about female historical characters, and you would explore that a lot more. Here I am slightly making sweeping comments that maybe I don't know are actually true. Apparently I've done a good introduction and outline of the aims of my dissertation. That's good. Oh God. So I've done my introduction, then I'm like, with this in mind, we look at the evolution of the perception of the female figure. Women through the ages have been repressed, blamed, and generally considered subservient, beginning with the fall of man. The fall of man. Like, do you know what it's giving? It's giving that scene in Big Bang Theory where Sheldon is trying to teach Penny about science, and he's going, "It's a warm night in ancient Greece."
A good question.
Thank you.
And to answer it, we first must ask ourselves, what is physics?
Oh, balls.
It's a warm summer evening in ancient Greece.
Like, you have to go so far back to start telling your story. I remember that I used to do this a lot, was like do quite grand sweeping statements, and now I know as a writer you don't need to do that. You can literally, I could have said at that point, that it's difficult to look at the evolution of the female figure throughout the entirety of history. For the sake of this particular dissertation, it's best to look at the 14th to the 16th century and how female characterisation in books has been reinterpreted throughout that very particular period in history, not beginning with the fall of man, Charlotte. Yeah, I'm making quite grand statements here, so I'm saying 3 words: obedient, silent and chaste. Women in the early modern period were expected to adhere to these attributes, and then I go on to say they were to expect no more in their lives than to possess these 3 qualities. And one of the markers has underlined it and gone, really? I'm reading a lot of sass. So basically, if you look at this, I don't know if you'll be able to see this on camera, but the tick and some of the text down here is in black. That's one marker, but then there's another in blue. So usually what happens is you have your initial marker, which is the person whose name is on the front of this dissertation, who is my main tutor. And I think that person will have been the black text, I think is my main marker, my main tutor. The blue is somebody else, someone completely anonymous. I have no idea who that was that read this other marker. I may have known around the time, but I certainly don't know now. But they're quite sassy. Were they the person who said, could you not think of a better title? No, that was still my original tutor. Thanks, love. But this has been going on for quite some time, was blue text. We're going to call them blue text. I mean, I get where they're coming from. I'm making grand sweeping statements about women throughout the entirety of history, starting with the fall of man. But, 21, love. Have a break. I'm providing examples of women from the early modern period who did try to kind of push the bounds of women, and I've named 3, and then I've put and numerous others. And blue text has just underlined that. Sassy underline. That's pretty good. I put, it's important that we look into the work of female literary figures of the period and identify the actions of strong women, as their work and actions allow us to see how Gregory manipulates the myth and reality within her novels. And my original tutor has ticked that and put good. I agree. I concur. Again, so this Amelia Lanier example that I'm using, she wrote from a biblical sense. So she wrote about biblical narratives and applied it to modern women, early modern women of the period. And I think that's really interesting. And I wish I had talked a little bit more about the kind of role of women and how women at the time sometimes found comfort in religion, but also could find themselves tethered by it, because women are perceived as very, very specific in the Bible. They have a very specific role. They are blamed for the sins of Eve. And what Amelia Lanier's books did in that period, from what I'm reading here, is really challenge that stereotype and challenge that narrative. And it would have been lovely to talk about that a little bit more. I think it's very kind of surface level is my description, and my kind of interpretation and my argument is even a little bit surface level. It is only a 5,000 word essay, and my word count was 4,994, so I really pushed the boundaries. Again, it's important that we show the difference between the perception of women in the masculine world and the actual capabilities of women, as both sides of this argument are depicted in Gregory's novels. I like that. That's a good sentence. Okay, so I've said, firstly, we must look at the origin of historical fiction, right? I've said that there, and then 4 lines later, I go on to Philippa Gregory. So I haven't actually looked at the origin of historical fiction. Arguably, I've looked at the origin of historical fiction in the earlier part of this essay, but my sentences are all, or my paragraphs are all kind of a bit out of order at this point. Also, this is a dissertation, right? And my opening sentence to introduce Philippa Gregory is, Gregory manages to blend fiction and history well. Try hard to do better. Oh, God. So I'm using an example, a book called Jack of Newbury by Thomas Deloney, which was written in 1597. And I've been talking about the book and how it's talking about different things that happened to the main character. And I've put, this text is significant as it can be directly compared to the Gregory novels, in particular The Other Boleyn Girl, as it deals with the same period and the same characters. Jesus. And then I've put, the comparison will take place later on. Why? We're 11 pages in of a 21-page essay, and that's including my bibliography, so I'm guessing maybe like 19 pages. Charlotte, get to the point. Get to the point quicker. We don't need the analysis to take place later on. We need it now. So now we've gone on to talk about how we create a historical novel. So the amount of historical characters versus fictional characters you should put in a book. It's quite an interesting statement that I'm making, you know. And I'm bringing in other people that have written about fictionalising history as well, you know, or other authors, authorities on the kind of subject. That's all great. But I just feel like we're 12 pages in. I probably should have got to this point earlier. Oh, that's good. Gregory's placing of such a strong female character as the narrator allows the independent moves of the repressed female to come through in a more striking way than if it had been one of the underlying plots. You know when you read back some of these stuff and most of the time you're like, oh my God, that's terrible, I need to rewrite it. And then every now and again you read a sentence and you go, I wrote that. I wrote that, that's actually quite good. The use of a fictional character in The Queen's Fool allows Gregory to be more experimental in her character's challenge to male supremacy. I like the fact that I've picked books of hers where you've got an actual historical character as the main character, main narrator, and then we've got a completely fictional character as well. So I'm getting quite a lot of ticks at this point. My pages are starting to, there's less notes on it, and there's more kind of ticks, and I even got a good at that point, so that's nice to see. I think I've managed to, I think where I was getting a little bit lost in the middle with the kind of historical analysis, now that I'm talking about the actual books themselves, which I knew inside out because I'd read them multiple times, I feel a lot more confident. You can hear that my voice is a lot more confident when talking about the books at this point and comparing them to the history. In conclusion, here we go. We see that the question of the female is an impressively diverse subject which requires an in-depth discussion of the novels and the period that Gregory writes in. For example, not what you have got here. What we can say then, so this final statement in this essay, let's see what it says. What we can say then is that Gregory's interpretation of the female figure in these 3 texts present a variety of different female figures written to give voice to the very diverse women of the period. So, here we go. We have read the whole thing. What do I think? I think it was all right. It's really hard because I'm obviously not a tutor. I'm not a teacher. I don't even read other people's dissertations. I don't know whether that is the level that you're expected to be at. I think obviously now 20 years on and 2 books under my belt and doing a lot more writing and growing up and reading more history and reading more historical fiction, I would like to see deeper critical analysis and deeper arguments and more kind of connections between the novels and the history and more knowledge. But I was 21 and this was a dissertation that was written in and amongst a number of other essays for my degree. And so let's read the comments to students. So I've got, this is a very good dissertation, that's okay, which makes a lucid, well-organised analysis of the female narrator in Gregory's novels. I think that's being slightly generous, but I'm going to take it. It is especially original in its research into the writings and social roles of women in the 16th century. I think that's supposed to be a full stop. The historical period in which Gregory's narrators are located is thus very ably reconstructed through clever use of a good range of primary and secondary materials. So that's good. The texts are closely read and intelligently linked. The dissertation contains some excellent ideas which could have been further developed by editing down some repetitive sections. I agree wholeheartedly. I feel like I spent quite a lot of time in quite sweeping statements, and actually if I'd been able to be a lot more succinct with what I was saying, I probably could have reached my point quite quickly and had more time to link the kind of history and the texts together. Overall, I've not been too embarrassed by that, aside from the fall of man. It was a warm night in ancient Greece. I'm itching to do a better job, but I think that's just the teachers petting me, the perfectionist that wants to rewrite it now and be like, please, tutor that I'm not naming here, please reread it now and tell me that you think I'm better than I was then. Obviously that's not going to happen. I've got a novel to finish before I start rewriting dissertation essays, but let me know, what did you think? I mean, obviously I know you haven't read it, but what do you think of the whole idea of reassessing a dissertation and looking at how your writing's changed? Like, would you do that? Would you reread an essay or a dissertation or something that you wrote like kind of 10, 20 years ago? And what do you think it would be like if you did the same? Yeah, right. I'm going to go and put this somewhere away and probably not look at it again for another 20 years, if ever. So yeah, there we go. I will see you in my next video. Take care. See you soon. Bye.